welcome back to the channel. In today's episode, we're going to go from this to this. Stick around and see how I do that. Alright, as you can see, I've got everything organized. And so most of this is just cast aluminum, so theoretically it would all be the same color, but that's not usually the way I approach it. But to back up a little bit, I've got all this primed with metal primer, which as you can see doesn't look much different than it did the last time we looked at this. So when I cleaned everything up, and this is what I used for my primer. Obviously it doesn't come in this container. This comes in the little square Tamiya 40 ml bottles. So I think this is 2 bottles of that in here, and it's thinned about 10% by volume with lacquer thinner. I think I just used Mr. Color lacquer thinner, just their regular thinner, not leveling thinner. So Tamiya makes a lacquer thinner as well, which is more or less the same. I just use the Mr. Color because that's what I can get easily. So anyways, this is what I prime it with. It's clear. You put it on pretty wet, I find. Usually one good wet coat's all you need. Their instructions say to do a couple coats, but I've never really had too many problems with just one really wet coat. And it's pretty thin stuff, and I thin it down a little bit more for airbrushing. You can get this in spray cans as well, and I use that a lot. Like if I don't have a ton of parts to do like this, I'm not going to bust out the airbrush. I'll just use a spray can. It's pretty wasteful, but especially to do a couple of little parts, but it's also a lot quicker. So anyways, yeah, I got everything's primed with that. Let it dry for, I've overcoated this with paint in as little as, 10 minutes. Like essentially spray everything, clean the airbrush, and move on to the next color, or your top coats, or whatever you're doing. So it dries pretty quick. You can overcoat it pretty quickly. You don't need to let it sit for hours or days or anything like that. But you can. It still works if you let it sit. So anyways, next is going to be the natural metal finish of everything. This is all going to be, from the best I've seen in my references, everything is on the engine cases and the heads and everything. It's not painted. It's just the natural casting. So, and from what I can gather, like this 1972, this was their first twin. And this was very early on. I think they just released the Ducati, the 750 GT, and this race bike, the Imola, was based on the GT for the most part. And these early engines, I believe, were sand cast, so a little bit of a rough. You don't want it to be super smooth. Like if you really wanted to go, you could put a little bit of texture in it, but the picture I saw, this texture looks fine. But being sort of a sandcast natural finish on this, it's not painted in any way. It's not going to be bright, shiny aluminum. It'll be a dull, grayish color. So that's what I'm going for. And really, I should just do the heads and the block and most of the cast parts the same color. But I like to create a little bit of visual interest in this kind of stuff to break it up a little bit so it's not terribly monotone. I just find that it adds more to it. And metals, natural metals, look different depending on the light they're in and how the light is hitting them. So even though the block and the heads will look the same color, they'll reflect differently, and one will look lighter than others depending on the lights sitting on it. When you paint metal surfaces, though, you don't get that. That's kind of one of the unique things about real metal, is the way it reflects light and reflects back color from the environment, depending on the angle and what's, what the ambient surroundings are like. It makes the metal look a little bit different. So that's why I'll paint the heads a slightly different shade than the block. I'll start with the same base, like I won't vary it too much in this case. Like what I'm going to do for the block is I'm going to use flat aluminum, Tamiya flat aluminum, I think, for the block and the heads. But the block I will coat straight onto the clear primer. So I'm not going to do a base coat, a ground coat on this. On the heads, I will paint them probably with Mr. Surfacer 1500 black. So that'll create a darker base coat, ground coat for the aluminum finish. And it'll subsequently darken the tone a little bit. It won't do it a ton. Tamiya, their paint's not really a translucent paint that's meant to go over a gloss black or a black background to begin with. It's like it covers really well. It's quite opaque. So it will only shift the tone a little bit. And especially depending on how heavy you lay it on, or I lay it on. So it'll just shift the tone of the heads a little bit compared to the block, which will just it'll just break up the monotone look of it and give it some depth and visual interest. So that's what I'm going to do with those. As you can see here, maybe you can't tell because you're just looking at the top. I've got everything organized by essentially color. So the big components of the block, the heads are going to be basically flat aluminum base color. The carbs I'll probably do with some other, I'll do like L-Clad's flat aluminum or something else just to vary the tone. These were, from what I can see, they more or less, they don't really have much on, maybe a slight green tint to them, like they're anodized or hard coated in some way to protect the aluminum. But it looks kind of like a clear, like a natural metal or aluminum finish, but slightly on the gray to a bit of green tint to them. So I'll do that. I'll break those up a little bit, and then the distributor. This is the points are in here. That's a cover. I'm going to do that and these pieces in a bit more of a bright color, like they've been slightly polished. These are the bevel drive housings, the breather, the distributor. I'll do those in a little bit different tone, a little bit brighter, a little bit more reflective tone to give the impression they've been polished a little bit. The sprocket I'll just do in a steel color. Then all the bolts and banjo fittings and everything, from what I can see, they're bright cad plated fasteners, so they'll all be sort of a brighter silver color. Not really chrome, but close to it. And then all these parts on the end here are black coated parts. So that's the way I've got this all organized, so that's all that. And then these are all the parts that are either going to be left. This are natural metal finish, although the tubes are chrome on the real bike. So these are like stainless steel tubes, so I might do something with that. Either try to polish them. They've got a bit of a, I was going to say they got a bit of a machine finish on them, but they're not too bad, so they might actually polish with a bit of metal polish. But then all the white metal here is going to be polished. So that's the plan. So I'm going to go off and start doing a bit of that, and I will check back in and maybe I'll get some paint down on these parts, and then I'll come back in and I'll talk about what paints I used. I'm not going to show me painting. It's pretty basic. I might do a separate video on that at some point. So you might have already seen that. I don't know, or have a look to see if I have done that. If you want to see more on my natural metal finish painting techniques that I use on the engines and sort of the finishing techniques, because I do a little bit. It's not just painting the engine. I'll talk about that a little bit later in this episode. So anyways, I'm going to go off and start getting some paint down, and I will see you in a bit. I got some paint on everything, and I just wanted to check in just to show you the effect I was talking about, and I think it's quite apparent here. with the cylinder, or with the crankcase and the cylinder heads. Let's just get the other crap out of the way. Get this over here. Zoom in a bit. You know, they look like two different colors, but they're not. They're both painted with LP38 flat aluminum. So the only difference is here I put it over the just the clear primer, so just a metal base essentially. But you could do it over a gray primer, a white primer, whatever, and you get this kind of effect. And this is over a black primer. So in this case, Mr. Surfacer 1500 black, and you can see that and they got about the same amount of coats build up on them, but you can see the tonal shift that creates. So this is a really useful tool when it comes to doing metallic paints, in my opinion, and I use it quite a bit. I'll vary what the ground coat essentially is what you'd call that base color. Vary the color of the base of the ground coat can influence the outcome of the top coat. So, and you can do that with either flats like this or with the high shine ones. You know, in something like for titanium, for example, I'll usually put a ground coat of yellow down, a gloss yellow, and then, you know, whatever my metallic of choice over the yellow. And that'll kind of give it a bit of a goldish tint to it. So, yeah, lots of different, you can use blue, dark blue, you can black, white, all sorts of different colors under the metallic will give you that nice little tonal shift. And you can do that to, like in this case, I'm doing it just to vary the appearance of it, is to give it some visual interest. So yeah, that's what it does. Of course, this is basically, you know, the starting point for this. So next, what I'll do with these is I'll give it a bit of a wash just to bring out some detail. I don't really want to make it dirty per se, or too pronounced on, you know, build up too much contrast to like it looks grubby and oily, because these things are brand new. So I'm not going to go too heavy on the wash, or sort of, you know, to bring it, but enough to bring out the detail. And then I'll probably give it a flat coat after I do that, just to kind of seal everything in. And then what I do on this color, which I find works really well, is I'll dry brush it with the enamel equivalent of Tamiya's flat aluminum. And that kind of brings up a bit more of the metallic luster. And it's kind of it sort of adds a bit of specular highlight to the look, like you get from a natural metal. You just automatically, like, regardless of the light, you get the specular highlights on the edges. So it artificially brings that up, because paint won't do that like real metal will. And that's where painting a metallic or a natural metal finish, you know, falls a little bit short. Like you can see here, I got specular highlights on this edge here, but not really the same way that they happen on a real metal, an actual metal. So so that's why I do that. I give it a bit of a light dry brushing. It kind of mimics that effect. It becomes artificial, because obviously I move this around and those specular highlights change, you know, on where they are, and then the look of the metal changes. You know, like this is all one color, obviously, but it's, you know, when you're looking at it, it's many different colors, whereas this has become very monochromatic. You don't quite get that difference. So that's what I'm trying to recreate. Of course, I'm doing it with a flat metal part, one that's not as reflective as something like this. So you've got to be cognizant of that, and that's where a bit of flat clear sort of helps with that. It knocks that down. So anyways, that's my process. It's not really much more than that, just a little bit, bring up the shadows, so essentially cranking the contrast button. Do that with a bit of a darker wash, and depending on what you're trying to achieve, if it's dirty or if it's just to bring contrast in. Contrast, I'll use black, and then how much you leave there kind of determines how much contrast you're going to add to the part. If I want to do contrast and a bit of aging and patina to the metal, then I'll use like a really dark brown, because it will make the metal look like it's kind of stained. So anyways, that's sort of how I approach this kind of stuff. So yeah, that'll be the crankcases, and I'll do the same with the cylinders, some bit of a wash, clean it up, and then a bit of dry brushing with some brighter silver color, and I kind of use either the flat aluminum enamel, or I think it's their chrome silver from Tamiya enamel, and I'll just dry brush it with that, and that works really well. And then all the rest, some other parts here, some other colors that I told you I was going to utilize. I'll just show you these two things. Hopefully we can kind of see how these two things look different. So it is hard to see. Maybe that will. Yeah, you can kind of see it a little bit better there. These two parts are painted with the same color. Again, the carb is over black, and this part, which is the bevel drive housing, is not. It's over the clear primer. So that's the difference. And that particular color is this one. Super Duralumin. This is they just came out with this color not too long ago. So they're Super Metallic 208 Mr. Color. Really nice paint. So that's the difference you get. This one I really like, because you put it over something that's really smooth and shiny to begin with, and it looks like polished metal. Like in this case, polished aluminum. I think it mimics that quite well. And I might do like these polished crankcases covers. They're not polished yet, but these are going to get polished. I'm going to sand them to smooth them out and polish them. But I find this white metal gets really silver. And by silver, I mean the metal silver, like jewelry silver. It gets really silvery looking when you polish it. And it looks nice, but it's a very, like polished silver is very bright. It's very white, almost. Whereas polished aluminum, although it's similar, is not as white. It's more yellowish. So polishing this is sort of just been polished aluminum on the real bike. So I might actually give it a whirl. I've done this on other kits where I've painted the polished surface, and it comes out really well. But I might use this color, and then it'll look more like polished aluminum. So anyways, that's what I'm thinking. I'll give that a whirl. Obviously I'll check in later. But yeah, I just wanted to show you the difference your base coat, your ground coat makes to the actual color. So essentially, one color of a natural metal color can be almost an infinite number of actual colors depending on what you use for a ground coat underneath it. And again, like I don't lay this on super heavy, but it's built up, decent enough. And what's nice about this stuff, let me just put those away. What's nice about the Mr. Colors and the Tamiya is they are super durable once sprayed on. So they're quite resilient once you spray them on. And So I really like them for that because you can handle it and it's not going to rub it off or anything like that, which some other metallics are bad for that. Some of the L-clads can be bad for that. Even these ones that are kind of high shine, they're super durable, so they're nice. So the other color I used was this one, which is super metallic 203. I don't have a jar of it. I just have what I've mixed, and that I did that little guy there. So that's painted with that color. They call it iron. It looks more like a stainless steel to me. But it's a really nice high shine color, I think. It looks like steel. I don't know where they're thinking iron. Maybe they're trying to mimic like machined iron, like when you surface a block of a cast iron cylinder block. Yeah, it kind of looks like that, but it's not. It wouldn't be like cast iron. That's not what this is at all. So that's a nice color. But so this jar here, these are 60 millimeter jars, milliliter jars. So what I do with all of these, with either the Tamiya metal colors or the, come on, focus. Thank you. Or the Mr. Hobby ones, the super metallics, is I thin them 3.5 to 1 with Mr. Rapid Thinner. So Mr. Rapid Thinner, like the name implies, is a fast evaporating thinner, lacquer thinner that Mr. Hobby makes. This is it here. If my camera would focus, thank you. So Mr. Rapid Thinner, it's it's a fast dry reducer thinner, lacquer thinner. And what that does is it just, with metallics, it helps the paint flash off and dry really quickly, which settles the pigments down right away, so that you don't get that graininess out of that you can get with metallic paint. So that works really well. But I thin them a lot. Like I say, 3.5 to 1. So that means 3.5 parts rapid thinner to 1 part of this, or the Tamiya. So essentially these are 10 mil of that. So I would put 35 milliliters of rapid thinner to 1 jar of this and put it in here. So that's what I do. And then you spray it at really low pressures, like in the neighborhood of 6 to 7 psi, half a bar for the non-imperial folks out there. And it works really well. And then you just mist coat it on, a couple light mist coats, and just keep building it up till you get sort of the color and the, to get the opacity you want, to get the color you want, depending on your base coat, your ground coat. So that's what I do for my metallic colors. So yeah, I got everything else done. I think, these are kind of small. They're kind of hard to show you, but these are like the fittings and the bolts and everything, are meant to be sort of, somewhat like a bright CAD plated, or that's what I did there. And I used SM1, which is super fine silver, so, or the 201, SM201. So, and it works well, and it's quite bright. It's can be fairly shiny, good sort of chrome-like paint, but not quite chrome. So yeah, there's where we're at with that. I am going to figure out why my camera is so slow to focus these days, and carry on with this. Get some weathering, for lack of a better term, on the block and start assembling things. And we'll see you probably, unless there's something interesting to show in between now and sort of the final assembly when I'm done. Yeah, I don't think there will be, really. Kind of talked about most everything. Oh, the one other thing I was going to talk about, in my last video, I think I was talking about the chassis, right? And some of the detail wiring for the chassis. And I was wondering what the thing that sits here is. And I don't know what was wrong with me. Well, I couldn't think about it, but of course it's the distributor. That's where the points are, and that's this little guy right here. This will sit there, and I was wondering about, see how it creates the different colors. The top of this is to be painted black, but the side will be that brighter aluminum, which is that piece. It's really a turned aluminum piece, so that'll look good. But anyways, that is the distributor, so to speak. It's where the points are. And so there'll be wires coming out of the side of that, which will go down and go to the coils. And then for the battery charging, I did figure out where that wires go. That comes straight out of the stator cover, right out of the end there. And there's actually the fitting. I painted it. So they give you that, but they don't give you any of the wiring for either of those things. So that'll come out of there. The only thing I can't figure out, or I haven't found yet, is where the voltage regulator is and what it looks like. You know, I don't imagine that the voltage regulator would have been anything terribly special. It would have been just, you know, a common voltage regulator for the time. So I'll just make something up that looks like that, and I'll probably just throw it under the seat. I don't know where else it would be. It must be sitting there, and then just run the wires. So that part's omitted from the kit. There is no voltage regulator. They don't indicate where the wiring for the voltage regulator or the, you know, from the stator to the voltage regulator or from that to the battery. So I'll just make that up, and same with the distributor wire, the wires for the coils, not the high tension leads, but the low tension part of that. That's not really included in the instructions anywhere, so I'll add that stuff. So anyways, I will see you in a little bit with probably a finished engine, and we'll just have a quick look and call her a day after that. So back in a bit. All right, so there we have it. I've got the engine all done. So yeah, not really much more to talk about. I think I went over, you know, my painting. I showed you some of that. I think the only thing I did since then was, well, I did all the panel lining on it. I did some dry brushing on it. I did dull coat on the engine cases and the cylinder heads. Also on the carburetors, I think I showed you the color I used. I used that Duralume over black primer. And then I came by and I gave it a bit of I gave it a panel line, just a wash, and dry brushed those as well with a bit of a lighter silver color. And then instead of just straight dull coat, what I did was I used gray green, a little bit of gray green. I don't know what it was exactly. I think it was, might have been the Imperial Japanese Navy gray green color. But just like a drop of that in, I don't know, a couple mils of flat clear to tint it just so slightly gray green to give it sort of the coating that they put on the carburetors to give that color. So that's what I did there, and a little bit of detail painting with some brass for the adjusting screws and whatnot. So excuse me, that's the carburetors. They turned out really nice. You know, they look a little bit different color-wise than the engine cases and the cylinder heads. So just breaks up the tones, different colors, whatever, for everything. It's all basically 100% aluminum, right? So it just gives it that little bit of variety. So yeah, that is the engine. Got it all done. What else did I talk about? I polished cases. I haven't done anything. I've just done my rough polishing. Yet they're still loose on here. Because a couple of reasons I'm not quite done with them. I'll probably give them another final polish before, I finish everything. But they look pretty good, both sides. You can see that there's still some scratches, so it'll need a little bit more polishing, but like I say, I'll finish those when I'm ready, done handling this thing. They're just full of smears from handling them and everything right now. So yeah, just give you a quick look around the whole engine, the heads. Both turned out really nice. The bevel drives, they look really good. All the screws, you can see that they're more of a shiny silver. Yeah, so pretty excited with that. Yeah, so once it gets in the frame, then we'll do all the wiring for the ignition wiring, the stator wiring, the spark plug wires. I guess that's pretty much all the wiring. And but won't do that until it's actually installed in the engine. So yeah, with that, that'll be the end of this episode, obviously, because that brings us now to the end. That gives us completely done step one. Got the engine all assembled. And step two, which is finishing off the assembly of the engine. You'll notice I put both carbs on. I got that one on and the back one. They only have you put the front or the rear one on right now and leave the front one off. And I'm not quite sure why that is. It could be that they figured it would, because you put it in down here. All right, sorry about the glare there. You put it in down here after you get the frame on it and get it in the frame. But the frame fits over top of it, no problem. I tested it to make sure that it didn't. The rear one's actually more fiddly getting the frame around it. But that's partially because of the way I've already built the frame. Whereas they say to capture... Actually, no, they don't. They don't tell you to capture the engine. So they tell you to put the engine after the frame's all bolted together. So I don't know what's up with that. But anyways, that's what they say to do. But the rear one actually is more fiddly than the front one. So with it on the engine. But the engine will go in there just fine with both of them on. So anyways, that's what I did. Just so it's not kicking around loose, as it waits for the rest of the stuff to catch up to get it in. So anyways, like I say, we're done up to the end of step two. Now, what's the next episode going to be? I'm not quite sure, to be honest with you. If we sort of go chronological, I'll build up the chain, which I don't know if I have the patience at the moment to start the chain, to be honest with you. Doesn't look like it's going to be that bad, but still. It's a little monotonous. And then it's the wheels is the next step after that, and then it's getting the frame together. So I might go back to working on the frame. That's what I might do next. It's got a lot of work to do on the frame. I'll talk about that more in the next, when I do the frame episode. It'll probably be just an episode just on the frame of the swing arm, because, with looking at all my references and doing a bit of research, the frames, although it's fairly accurate, it's just not quite right. Like there's a couple things like the regulator. There is something that goes here. When do we put that on? We put the... Where the heck does it go on? It goes on way over here in step 7. This thing here. That could be the regulator. It's awfully small for voltage regulator though, but that could be what that's supposed to be. So I'm not sure, but really the pictures pictures I've seen of not necessarily this race bike, but of 750 GTs, 750 SSs, which came after this, and S's, the sports and the super sports. They have the regulator and a little fuse box sort of sits up under the seat, sort of like right up in this area. So there's a little fuse box that goes right there, and then the regulator sits right behind it. So I don't know if that little thing there is supposed to be the regulator, or if it's what it is, or if it's a rectifier, or unclear. But there's got to be something under there. So I'll probably work on scratch building a bit of that, get the frame together. Well, I got the frame together, but clean up the frame. I want to probably add welds to the frame because they're pretty prominent on the real bike. Like it's not a brazed frame, so they're not smooth fillet joints. They're pretty rough looking welds. Typical Italian manufacturing from the late 60s and early 70s. Look at a Ferrari. The welds on those things are horrendous looking, but they work, right? And the frames on this were about the same, you know. It looks like The Apprentice did them all. But anyway, so I want to replicate, I want to do the welds on the frame because this frame doesn't have any welding represented on it. And the other thing that I haven't found pictures of directly, but they only have 3 coils on this bike, which makes 0 sense to me. Like when they have later on when we wire up the spark plug leads, they got 1 coil. You know, you got a lead and you split it and you run it to 2 plugs. Well, I've never seen that ever in my life. I've seen 1 coil, you know, run 2 plugs before, but it usually has 2 high tension sockets on it. So there'd be 2 separate leads, but I've never seen a lead split. No, I could have just never seen that. But I'm pretty sure there'd be 4 coils on this thing. So I think he just couldn't see where the 4th one was. I have seen a picture of one, but I don't know if it was the race bike or not. It had the 2 coils here up on the center tube hanging, and then where he's got the 3rd coil down on this down tube engine support, he's got one on one side, but I've seen a picture of one where it's got the other coil on the other side, which makes sense because these are big old coils. So I don't know why they didn't use, well, because they're Italian, they didn't use Japanese ones where they could run 2 plugs off of 1 coil. But anyways, so I got to figure that out, and maybe I got to duplicate a coil and put it over here. That's what I'm probably going to do. I can't 100% verify that's correct, but you know, just my gut's telling me you wouldn't split a high tension lead. They don't really work that way. So anyways, more than likely that'll be the next episode, is we're going to start working on the frame. I can always build the wheels, you know, when they come up, you know, which is the next step after you get the frame together and you build the rear wheel. I might just do it then, and then do the front wheel as part of the front suspension step. So that's what I'll probably do. I'll have to build the chain either right after I do the frame anyways, because it's got to go in when the engine goes in. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed that. It was a neat little little engine to build up. It's certainly ended up being a pretty good looking little representation of Ducati's first V-twin bevel drive large displacement engine. Large displacement, 750 in the day was considered a large displacement engine. So yeah, she's a lovely little thing. It'll look really good sitting in that frame. That's going to be that sort of blue-green metallic color. So there we go. All right. Just want to thank you all for watching. I really appreciate it. I appreciate it if you're not already, if you subscribe to my channel and give me a like or a thumbs up or whatever. And yeah, we'll see you at the next episode. Take care. Bye-bye.